Settle in. Let the room go quiet. Tonight you are on a mountain in California, in the autumn of 1890. The road ends at 4,200 feet. You step down from the wagon and your boots find gravel. The horses breathe out. Steam leaves their noses and drifts sideways. The air up here is thinner than the air below. It takes your chest a moment to learn it. You do not hurry. Nobody hurries here. Below you the Santa Clara Valley is already dark. A few lamps burn in San Jose, 25 miles away, small as pinholes. The sun has gone behind the coastal range. What is left of it is a band of orange lying flat along the west. Above that band, the sky is already the color of deep water. You turn and look at the building. It is white and low, and longer than you expected. At the south end there is a dome 75 feet across. At the north end there is a smaller one, 25 feet. Between them sits the meridian circle in its own narrow house. This is the Lick Observatory, and it is only 2 years old. It is the first observatory in the world built to live on a mountain. Everything you can see was carried up here by horse. Every brick, every beam, every crate of glass. The road was cut so gently that a loaded wagon would never have to stop. You walk toward the door with your coat buttoned to the throat. The wind here does not gust. It leans. It leans on the side of the dome and makes a low sound you will hear all night. Inside, the hallway smells of oil and cold stone. There is a lamp turned low on a shelf and a logbook beside it. You write your name and the date. November 1890. You are the night assistant. Your work begins when the sun is finished. Nobody will speak to you for the next 11 hours. That is not loneliness. Up here, it is a kind of courtesy. You take the lamp. You start down the corridor toward the great dome. The dome turns. The stars drift. You are awake. The door to the great dome is heavy and it opens slowly. Cold air comes out to meet you before you go in. The room inside is not a room. It is the inside of a shell. 75 feet of curved iron above your head, and nothing in the middle of it. Nothing except the telescope. It is 57 feet long. It is 4 feet across at the widest. It weighs more than 12 tons and it is balanced so finely that one hand can move it. At the upper end are 2 discs of glass, 36 inches across. The glass was poured in France and carried to Boston by ship. Alvan Clark and his son ground it and polished it by hand. Then it crossed the whole country by rail, packed like something asleep. Right now it is the largest telescope lens on Earth. Nothing anywhere sees further than this. Beneath the telescope is a pier of cast iron on a vault of brick and stone. Inside that vault is a coffin. James Lick paid for all of this and died 12 years before it was finished. So they buried him under the instrument and put a bronze plate on the stone. The whole dome is his headstone. It weighs several hundred tons and it turns. You stand for a while with your hand flat on the cold iron of the pier. You can feel the mountain through it. Nothing moves. Nothing needs to. Then you go to the wall and take hold of the crank. The shutter of the dome is opened by hand, and it is not quick. You turn. The gears take the weight. Something high above begins to part. A line of night appears in the ceiling, thin as a knife cut. You keep turning. The line becomes a gap. The gap becomes a corridor of sky. Cold falls straight down through it onto your shoulders. You stop. You are breathing harder than you thought you would be. There is no glass between you and the sky now. There is nothing between you and the sky. The dome must be turned as well, and that is a different crank. You lean into it and the whole shell above you begins to move. It grinds. It complains. And then it goes quiet and keeps going. The corridor of sky swings across the ceiling until it points where you need it. The dome turns. The stars drift. You are awake. Now you must put out the lamp. You turn the wick down until the flame is a thread, and then until it is nothing. The dome goes black. Truly black. You cannot see your own hands. Do not move yet. Wait. The eye takes a long time to open. Not the lid. The inside of the eye. It takes 20 minutes for the first change. 40 for the second. It takes most of an hour before the dark truly gives you anything. So you stand in the middle of a very large dark room and you do nothing at all. This is the part nobody writes down. The catalogues do not record the hour a man spends becoming able to see. Slowly, the shutter opening stops being a hole and becomes a window. 1 star. Then 4. Then more than you can count in a single look. The iron ribs of the dome come back as grey lines above you. The telescope becomes a long shape you can walk around without touching. You find the observing chair by memory and by the sound of your own steps. There is one lamp you are allowed. It has a red glass. Red light does not undo the work your eyes have done. So the only color in this whole building tonight is the color of a coal. Everything else is gray and silver and the black between. Your breath is visible even in that little red light. You keep your gloves on. You will keep them on until morning. There is a stove somewhere in the building, but not in here. Heat makes the air shiver, and shivering air ruins the image. So the dome is kept as cold as the mountain outside. On purpose. You will be cold for 11 hours and it is not a mistake. It is the method. Somewhere below, the rest of the mountain is asleep. There are houses here, and families, and children who go to school on this summit. This is the oldest place in the world where astronomers simply live. You can see one window still lit, far along the ridge. Then it goes out. Now you are the only person on this mountain who is awake on purpose. The dome turns. The stars drift. You are awake. The telescope is 57 feet long, and the eyepiece is at the low end. But the low end is not always low. When the telescope points near the horizon, the eyepiece is near the ground. When it points near the top of the sky, the eyepiece is 16 feet in the air. There is no ladder tall enough that a tired man should climb it in the dark. So the builders did something else. They made the entire floor move. You are standing on a wooden disc most of 70 feet across. It is a floor. It is also an elevator. You go to the control and you release it. Somewhere under the boards, hydraulics take the load. There is a sigh. A long, low, patient sigh, like a large animal settling. And then the room begins to rise. Not the room. You. The whole floor of the world, going up. The walls slide down past you, slowly, like water draining. You hold the rail. You do not need to. You hold it anyway. This is the largest moving floor ever built for looking at the sky. It rises. It stops. The eyepiece is now at the level of your face. You did not go to the instrument. The instrument waited, and the ground came to it. Below you now, 12 feet down, is the pier and the vault and the man inside it. You are standing above his grave in the dark, doing the thing he paid for. It does not feel morbid. It feels like being trusted with something. Now you find the counterweights and take the clamp off the axis. 12 tons of iron and glass. You push it with the flat of one hand. It moves like a door on new hinges. There is something in that which never stops being strange. You bring the tube around until it points at the gap in the ceiling. Then you start the driving clock. A weight begins to descend inside the PA, very slowly, on a cable. As it falls, it turns a governor, and the governor turns the telescope. The telescope now turns at exactly the speed the Earth turns, in the opposite direction. Which means, for as long as that weight is falling, the sky is standing still. You will hear that clock all night. A slow, soft tick under everything. The dome turns. The stars drift. You are awake. The first object tonight is Saturn. You find it first with the small finder scope riding on the side of the great tube. A pale steady point, low in the south, not twinkling like the others. Stars twinkle because they are points and the air is moving. Planets do not, because they are disks. That is the whole difference, and once you know it, you can never unsee it. You center it. You lock the slow motion controls. You bend to the eyepiece. Close your other eye. Let the eyelashes settle. Breathe out and hold still. For a moment there is only a smear, because your eye is still deciding. Then it settles. And there it is. Small. Perfectly sharp. Slightly yellow, like old ivory. A ball, and around it, separate from it, a ring. Not attached. Not touching. You can see black sky through the gap. And there is a line across the ring itself, a dark division, thin as a hair. That gap is wider than the Atlantic Ocean, and you are seeing it with your eye. Not a photograph. Not a drawing. Light that left Saturn a little over an hour ago. It crossed all that distance and ended inside you. You do not say anything. There is nobody to say it to. You just stay bent over the eyepiece longer than the work requires. In the room next door, another astronomer has been putting a spectroscope on this planet. He is trying to find out whether the ring is solid. Nobody yet knows. It has been argued about for 200 years. The answer, when it comes, will be that it is not solid at all. It is countless small bodies, each one going round on its own, all of them together looking like a ring. A crowd, moving so precisely that from here it looks like one calm object. You take up the pencil and the observing book. You write the time. You write the seeing, on a scale of 1 to 5. Tonight you write 4. It is a good night. The air is quiet. Then you draw, badly, what you see. Everyone draws it badly. Everyone draws it anyway. Somewhere in this building is a man whose drawings of Jupiter have no equal on Earth. He does it with a pencil, at night, in the cold, one line at a time. Nobody has yet made a machine that sees a planet better than a patient man. You close the book. You look up through the open shutter at the raw sky. The dome turns. The stars drift. You are awake. At midnight the work changes. Looking is one kind of astronomy. Keeping is another. You go down to the plate room with the red lamp shielded in your hand. The photographic plates are sheets of glass coated with dry emulsion. They are cold and flat and heavier than they look. You handle them by the edges only. A fingerprint is a ruined night. You load one into the holder by feel, in total darkness, with your eyes open and useless. Your fingers know this. They learned it weeks ago and have not forgotten. You climb back up. You slide the holder into place at the eyepiece end. You open the shutter of the plate. And now you wait. Not 2 seconds. Not 2 minutes. An hour. Sometimes 2. The emulsion is slow, and the stars you want are faint, and there is no other way. So for the next hour your job is to keep one star exactly where it is. There is a small guiding eyepiece with a cross of fine wire in it. You put a star at the center of the cross. And you keep it there. The clock drive is good, but it is not perfect. Nothing mechanical is. It drifts a little. The air shifts. The telescope flexes under its own weight. So the star creeps off the wire, and you touch the fine screw, and you bring it back. A quarter turn. Wait. Another quarter turn. Wait. For an hour, this is your entire life. Your eye at a wire. Your hand on a screw. One star that must not move. It should be dull. It is not dull. It is closer to prayer than to work. You stop noticing your feet. You stop noticing the cold in your hands. There is only the wire, and the star, and the very small distance between them. The mind goes very quiet when it is given one simple thing to hold. Behind you, the driving weight is still descending inside the pier. It has been falling since 9:30, and it will fall until it reaches the bottom. The whole sky is being held still by a heavy thing falling slowly in the dark. You find that you like knowing that. At last the hour is finished. You close the plate shutter. Whatever was up there is now inside the glass, and it will still be there in 100 years. You will not see what you caught until the morning. That is part of it too. The dome turns. The stars drift. You are awake. Between 1 and 3 in the morning, the mountain gets colder than the valley. There is frost forming on the outside of the dome. You can hear the wind change direction. It comes off the sea now. Below the summit there is fog. There is almost always fog. It lies flat over the whole valley like a second sea. The lights of the towns are gone. They were swallowed an hour ago. That is why they built here. Not for the height. For the calm. The fog holds the shaking air down below it, and leaves the top of the mountain in still water. Every big telescope built since has copied this idea. It began here. You blow on your fingers inside the gloves. It does not help much. You walk once around the platform to keep the blood moving. Your footsteps sound different up here, above the floor, onward over air. You pass the observing book and you read what you wrote 3 hours ago. The handwriting is already worse than it was. Every observer's book gets worse toward morning. It is a kind of honest record. You look at the next object on the program. A double star. 2 suns going around each other, very far away. There is a man on this staff who has found more than 400 of them. He does it by looking. Only by looking. Night after night after night. You swing the tube. The clock takes over. The pair comes into the field. At first it looks like one star. Then the air goes calm for half a second, and it opens into 2. One faintly gold. One faintly blue. Sitting beside each other in nothing. They have been going around each other since long before there was anyone to notice. They will still be doing it long after tonight is forgotten. You measure the angle between them with a fine screw and a scale. You write the number down. For figures. That is all it becomes. One number, added to a column, in a book, in a building, on a mountain. Nobody will read it for 30 years. Then someone will, and it will matter. That is the arrangement. You do not get to see the use of your own patience. You put the pencil down. You put your hands under your arms. You wait. The dome turns. The stars drift. You are awake. At some point after 3, the sound changes. It takes you a moment to understand what changed, because a thing has stopped. The driving clock has run down. The weight has reached the bottom of its travel. And with it, the sky begins to move again. Very slowly. The star you were holding starts to slide toward the edge. You could rewind it now. There is a crank for that too. But you do not yet. For a minute you let the Earth turn. You watch the star cross the field of view at its own pace, and go out the other side. It is not the star moving. It is the floor under you. It is the mountain. It is the whole of California, turning east. You are moving at something near 700 miles an hour and you feel nothing. You have been moving that fast your entire life. Standing still has never once been something you have actually done. You rewind the clock. The weight climbs back up its cable in the dark. The soft tick begins again underneath everything. You sit down in the observing chair and you do not point the telescope anywhere. The program allows for this. Between 3 and 4 the seeing is often poor. The air near the ground has cooled and begun to slide downhill. So you rest and you look at the sky with nothing between you and it. With no lens, the sky is not sharp. It is soft and enormous and full. There is a pale road across it, from one horizon to the other. Nobody in this building knows what it is yet. They argue about it downstairs. They call it the galaxy and they do not know its shape. Some of them think it is everything there is. They are wrong, and the proof will be found in this building, but not tonight. Tonight it is simply a pale road, and you are lying back in a wooden chair looking at it. Your breath goes up and crosses it and disappears. You are not thinking about anything in particular now. That is allowed. That is, in fact, most of the job. The clock ticks. The dome holds. The mountain carries you east. The dome turns. The stars drift. You are awake. The first sign is not light. It is color leaving the stars. The faintest ones go first. They do not set. They simply stop being there. You notice you can see the rail of the platform without trying. Then the edge of the shutter. Then your own sleeve. The east is not bright. It is only less black than it was. You have one more thing to do and then the night is finished. You cap the eyepiece. You cap the finder. You cover the great lens. The glass must never see the sun. Not once. Not for a moment. You clamp the axis. 12 tons goes still and stays still. You take the crank and you begin to close the shutter. The corridor of sky narrows. Becomes a gap. Becomes a line. Becomes nothing at all, and the dome is a shell again. You lower the floor. The long sigh comes again, the other way round. The walls climb back up past you and the world returns to its usual height. You stand for a moment beside the pier before you go. The bronze plate is just visible now in the grey light. You do not say good night to it. But you do not leave without pausing either. You take the plate holder and carry it down to the dark room. You leave it where the day staff will find it. Somewhere in that glass, an hour of the sky is waiting to be developed. You write the last line in the observing book and you sign it. Seeing 4. Wind west, light. Plate exposed 1 hour 8 minutes. Clear throughout. Then you close the book, and the night is officially over. You go outside and the cold is different now. Thinner. Almost sweet. The fog below has not moved. It is still lying there, white and flat, like a floor. The sun is not up yet. But the fog has started to take color from it. Pink at the eastern edge. Grey everywhere else. Behind you, the great dome stands closed, holding one night inside it. You walk along the ridge toward the house where there is a bed and a stove. Your boots are loud on the gravel and you do not mind. Nobody is sleeping who matters. You will sleep through the whole of the daylight, and wake when the sun is going down. And then you will do it again. The dome turns. The stars drift. And now, at last, you may sleep.